Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and welcome to something a little bit different and something that I haven't done for a long time, and that is talking over GTA racing footage that has already happened. It's not live stream footage or anything like that, and this was all done off stream, and the reason that I had to do it off stream will become apparent, and I'll explain about the backstory behind all of this as we go through. So back in, this was all happening, what you're about to see on the screen. It all happened around summer 2019, so the summer of last year, and I had an idea that I wanted to do a series trying to win a premium race in every single supercar that's available. So obviously the Emirates had just been released at that point. The Krieger hadn't even been released, so the Emirates was obviously clearly the number one. The Krieger would come out a few weeks after I did these races, and you know it would be close to the Emirates at least, but in general the Emirates and the Krieger are still the top dogs at this point, and they're much quicker than pretty much everything else. So already I was going into it with the Emirates being the king, and it was a series idea that I had that I didn't know how it was going to progress, and I didn't even know whether it was going to be possible. Obviously when you get to the lower down order of the supercars, you might be able to get a few easy wins or lucky wins in some of the sort of top supercars that aren't on the very top pace, things like the S80, the Wagner, quick stuff that is still quick even if it's, you know, quite a bit behind the Emirates and the Krieger. But I had no idea whether I was going to even be able to get any decent positions or put in a decent showing in some of the lower down supercars. So it was just an idea that I played around with back in the summer of 2019 because I was in Sweden at the time. I wasn't really doing too much else. I was kind of having a little bit of a break from various videos and streams. So since I had a bit of downtime, I thought, all right, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And you know, over the course of a few days, obviously premium races, the actual track that you race on changes every single week, and there's only going to be a select number of tracks that I'm even going to be able to do this on where cars that aren't on the pace even have a chance at trying to get a win. And obviously with Cutting Coroners being the track that, you know, the track that was on available that week, it kind of just all came together at the right time, that such that it was the perfect place to start. Obviously Cutting Coroners is my original testing track when I did the stock vehicle testing back in early 2014, and obviously it's not the testing track that I have now. There are differences. My current testing track was based off of Cutting Coroners. My current testing track is Cutting Coroners GP, and that is coroners because it goes through the hospital and by the coroner's office, not cutting corners. It's a play on words. A lot of people don't seem to get that, and a lot of people don't seem to get that my testing track isn't this circuit, even though as you look at the footage from any of my testing videos, it's pretty clear that my testing track has more corners than this. But anyway, I digress. The idea that Cutting Coroners was the premium race for that week, it kind of made sense that I would start this challenge on my old testing track, the classic track. Now obviously you saw my first race in the Emirates. That was actually the first race that I did in the Emirates at all. I'd tested it a few days before, I think, and then in fact this might have actually happened just as the Emirates was released. So the Emirates was released on the Thursday, and Cutting Coroners was the premium race on that Thursday as well for the next week. So that was the first race that I'd ever done in the Emirates. It was the first time I'd driven on this track for a good number of years. So before I went on and did some other cars, I kind of went back to the track offline without anybody else to try and practice a few laps, because I've never really hot lapped Cutting Coroners, and my first race in the Emirates wasn't exactly the quickest it could have been. I still managed to get the win, as you saw, but that was mainly down to, you know, the car. It was going to be the easiest win that I would get because I was racing in the quickest car available at the time. So the next car that I chose was the Thrax. Pretty quick still, you know, in that top 5 area, but obviously a good couple of seconds per lap down on the Emirates, and what the Krieger would eventually do as well. And that went that was an even easier race than the first one, as you can see from the footage. It was pretty straightforward, and it all depends on who you get in a lobby. If you're racing around with people who can't turn corners, who crash into walls and all that kind of stuff, you can be in a bullet and you'll still be able to get a win. And that's why, when it comes to all my testing videos and lap time videos, and in the descriptions, I always say it's all about how relevant the testing is going to be for you. Just because you can win a few races in a Cyclone doesn't make the Cyclone suddenly the quickest supercar in the game, because it's all about driver skill. But obviously my testing is meant to showcase how the cars perform with the same driver behind the wheel when you start getting to the limits of what the cars can do. So the Thrax race had gone relatively well, and I managed to get a comfortable victory there, and that wasn't necessarily to be expected, but it also wasn't too much of a surprise because the Thrax really isn't that far away from the top cars anyway. So I decided to kick it up a notch and go down to the Zentorno for my next car. Now, the Zentorno is still a quick car in its own right, and it's a great budget option if you don't have that much money. The Zentorno costs very little in comparison to other top supercars, and it can still hold its own in terms of just general speed, but obviously it's a good few seconds now off the pace of what the top vehicles can do, so it was going to be an uphill challenge. Now, my idea with this series originally was that I would do 4 cars every video, starting with the quickest of the selection and then going slower and slower. So obviously that's why I started with the Emirates here, and then obviously the Thrax, which was a little bit slower but not too much, then the Zentorno, which is a fair bit slower again, and then the Entity, as you've already seen probably from the thumbnail, is the final vehicle that I chose for the 4. And every single video was going to be a new 4 vehicles to kind of mix it up as we went along. Obviously I was planning the Bullet to be the very last vehicle in the very final video, but I wanted to mix it up like that so that it wasn't just a case of using the 4 quickest vehicles first and then going down the order all the through the course of the series and ending up with the final video being the 4 slowest vehicles and it just taking an age to do. I wanted to kind of mix it up, so that's why you're seeing those vehicles in this video. Now, I never really got to realize this sort of concept as a full series, and the reason really is just because it was a perfect mix of me having the time to load up these premium races every 45 minutes to an hour and give them a go whilst I had a bit of downtime in Sweden, not really doing too much else. As soon as I got back home, as soon as I started streaming again and making testing videos and all this kind of other stuff, it was just, as it often is, it's difficult to find the free time to be able to do this. So I never got to realize this as a series, and these were the only cars that I ever got to do this with. But I wanted to bring it to you guys because it's an interesting story, I think, especially when we get to the Entity part of it, and amazing some of the races that happened, especially the very last one. And I wanted to just show that and explore it and explain it and let you guys see it. So even though we're not going to see things like the Adder or the Bullet getting taken and around a track and trying to win a premium race in those vehicles, even though that was my intention, I think the Entity races, the Entity is certainly slow enough to make it a big challenge, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the Entity went when it comes to doing these premium races. So as you can see, I managed to get the win in the Zentorno. I did a nice sort of second and third lap after a bit of a rusty first few corners, and I ran out a pretty decent winner there, and I wasn't really expecting that. I wasn't expecting to win in the Zentorno the first time out. I was expecting it to take at least 2 or 3 attempts, but again, it all just depends on who's in the session and your relative racing ability in comparison to who you're racing against, as well as what cars the other people are racing against as well. So first 3 races I did, 3 victories in 3 different cars, and now it was time for the Entity. And this race in particular was where it kind of showed itself that the challenge was going to be a lot more difficult. Now the Entity used to be the quickest supercar in the game. Obviously, it wasn't helped by me totally not getting caught out by the slipstream. I was used to vehicles with better brakes and all that kind of stuff. I got totally caught out by the slipstream originally there, and then the Entity, it was the quickest vehicle in 2013, but when you start putting it up against some of the quicker vehicles now, like the S80RR, the Emirates, the Krieger, the Thrax, it really starts to show its age and shows how far off the pace it is now. We're talking 5 or 6 seconds per lap. And this first race with the Entity that I had really showed how difficult this was going to be for me to get a victory. And this is on, one of the premium races that has more corners than most. There's only a small number of tracks that this can even be attempted on, and that's another reason why we haven't really seen this series realised, because it's not just a case of finding the time to be able to load up a premium race and try it out. It's also the premium race having to be on the right track for supercars first of all. Most of the premium races, there's maybe 5 or 6 premium races that are for supercars. There's a lot that are for sports cars, muscle, motorcycle, things like that, sports classics. So it's impossible for me to do those premium races and win in a supercar. So it has to, and then out of the 5 or 6 premium races that are for supercars, they have to have enough corners for me to be able to put up a bit of a fight. There's no point in me loading up a premium race that's just all straights, for example, because unless I'm in something like a Divest 8 or one of the top supercars, I'm just going to have no chance. So it has to, pretty much there's this track, Cutting Corners GP, Downtown Underground. They're the only two that sort of come to mind straight away, and those are those are the selections that I have. So it would require me to do a lot of these races in pretty much the time span of 1 week, getting all the races, getting as many races as I can in, and trying to win in as many cars before the premium race then switches. So it's never gotten to the point where I've been able to devote that time to doing more cars. But as you can see, things were definitely a lot more difficult at this point, and all it takes, I still managed to finish second in the Entity, which you might consider a good result, and I would say it probably is, but not when you're trying to get a win. Now, this was the second lobby that I joined, and based on the sort of the names and the levels in this lobby, I thought, second race, I might actually be able to get this done. You can never judge a book by its cover, but I was at least a little bit more optimistic based on the levels of the drivers in this race that I was going to be able to at least put up a bit more of a fight. But of course, in the one race that I feel like I might be able to actually get a win, it bugs out. Nobody can make it through to the next screen, and I have to reload the lobby. And I reloaded the lobby into a lobby that had some good drivers in this time, and that was kind of always the thing with these races. All it takes is one good driver driving a top car, and you don't really stand a chance. It doesn't matter how good you are in an Entity, if there's someone who's just about your level or even slightly worse, but they're driving an Emirates, you don't stand a chance. It's just impossible, and unless they're making significant mistakes, and that can always happen, but in general, if they're a good driver or you have to be to a certain level to be able to even do this in the first place. So if they're going to be on your level, chances are you're not going to be able to beat them, and that's the whole point. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to lap time testing vehicles and things like that. When you're up against people on the same level and you're driving cars to their maximum ability, yes, driver difference does make differences in driver skill does make a difference to any single race result, but overall the car will make a much bigger difference when people are at the same level, and as soon as you get closer to the top level. So it was kind of, I was realizing that this was going to start being a little bit more difficult. Like you saw in the first race, there was one guy who was just able to drive away. As we see in this race, there's 2 people. Obviously one guy makes a mistake there, but there's always somebody who's driving something that's much better than an Entity and is able to drive it to its maximum. As you can see, that the guy in the lead in the Emirates, he even slows down at this point and is just, toying with me. And there's nothing I can do, I just, even the thing that really showed it to me at one point is that even when I'm in the slipstream of another vehicle, it still takes forever to be able to catch up. And sometimes I can't even catch up even with the slipstream, because obviously the Entity's top speed isn't that great, the Emirates is much better, and then the Emirates can just corner quicker at higher speeds, it brakes better, it's just a better car. So as long as you've got one person in one of those cars, there's very little you can do. And I was trying my best after the guy slowed down, I was trying my best to stay with him. Maybe I could utilize the slipstream and make him pay for slowing down in the first place, but there's just nothing I can do. I think it's pretty decent that I was able to stay with that Emirates for so long throughout the lap, but obviously it's utilizing the slipstream, and then as soon as we get to the back straight and the final corner, he drives away. So you could say that I was pretty close to winning this one, but I was never really in with a shout. And it was interesting to be challenging myself like this and using some different cars, but it was also starting to get a little bit frustrating that I could drive perfectly and it wouldn't make a difference. So this is kind of I guess this is the third attempt in the Entity, the third proper attempt. We won't count the one where everyone just bugged out. During all of this I was thinking, God, if only I'd managed to actually get into that race and it hadn't have bugged out, maybe I could have had that Entity victory done already. And obviously this was all in the wider scope of I want to race in all the supercars, all 40 of them, and try to get a victory. So this was sort of in the early stages of the week. I was planning to do more races as the week went on, and it just never really happened, and I only ended up getting enough for one video. What I was going to say were the 4 vehicles for that video, and it never happened that I was able to do any more. But yeah, it's crazy to realize how far the Entity has fallen, from being the very quickest car in 2013, and back when the game was released, the Entity was the number one, and a lot of people, they were always talking about the Adder. The Adder's the quickest car in the game, and nobody thought about the Entity unless you kind of knew what you were doing. And then you go into a race and you'd see a race full of people in the Adder because they thought it was the quickest, and then you'd take an Entity and just demolish everybody because it's that much better in the corners. And now the Entity is much closer to the back of the supercars class than it is to the top of the supercars class, and that's it's kind of crazy. The supercars class only had 7 vehicles when GTA Online was released back in 2013. The Entity was the number 1, Cheetah was in 2nd place, the Adder was actually in 3rd place for lap time if I remember correctly, and then we had things like the Turismo R and the Zentorno as DLC vehicles in 2014. Obviously the Zentorno was a good step up, and that kind of changed. Everybody started using the Zentorno, but since then it just exploded. The Osiris, the T20, and then from that point on we just had new supercars all the time, making things quicker and quicker and quicker, and to the point where now we have the Emirates and the Krieger, which are getting 57-second lap times, and the Entity's still sat at a 1:02. So it's pretty crazy the way that the speeds have moved on, and I think this race kind of shows it. I haven't really made any major mistakes during this race. I've driven relatively cleanly, but I just got absolutely trounced by someone just being quick in a quicker car, and that's all that it takes. And that the lap time difference kind of shows it. And I think the 4th race here, this is obviously the 4th attempt in the Entity now. This was a little bit more frustrating than the others, because at least in the other races, as we've seen from the people who got the best laps and the general gaps that I had finishing in 2nd place or 3rd place or wherever it might have been, It was pretty clear that even if I was in an Emirates, it was going to be a challenge to win the race. It would, I might have won the race if I was in an Emirates, but I might not. It would have been pretty close, slipstream usage, how well each driver does when under pressure and driving side by side with people. But this was the first race that I did in the Entity where it felt like if I'd had a competitive car, it wouldn't have even been an issue. I would have got a relatively straightforward win. In this one, I believe the best lap is about 52 seconds around the circuit, and obviously that's someone, I think, from, if memory serves, just someone driving an Emirates, and 52 second lap in an Emirates around here is okay, but it's not fantastic. So this was the first one where it started to get a little bit more frustrating, where I felt like this could have been a win if I was driving something properly. This could have been a relatively straightforward win if I was on a level playing field, but because I'm in the Emirates, the Entity, I'm just behind and I can't really do anything to catch up. I'm there or thereabouts, the leaders are just there in front of me, but I can't do anything to get up on them, even though they're not driving as quickly as one person could. They're not driving the car optimally and really shouldn't be winning this race if I was also in a decent car, but because I'm trying to do this challenge, they're getting the victory from it. And probably the main frustration from this one also came from the fact that I made a mistake at the very start by not getting that boost at the start, and if I had gotten that boost, maybe I would have been able to stick with these guys a little bit, enough to be able to use the slipstream to try to do something. But it was one of those races where the opportunity was there more so than any other race that I'd done so far in the Entity, but I'd made a silly mistake at the very start, not got the boost, that put me on the back foot, and I just couldn't recover from that because the car wasn't on the pace. So yeah, from the first 3 races in 3 different cars, getting wins first time out, and that was the idea with the series, that I was going to show all my failures as well. Maybe not in as much depth as this in terms of showcasing the full races, but at the very least showcasing highlights of every single race that I did to show how many attempts it took me to get the victory. So at this point, with 4 attempts in the Entity XF, after having done the first 3 races first time out in 3 different cars, I was starting to get a little bit frustrated. So we're coming on to the 5th attempt with the Entity XF, and spoiler alert, this is the final attempt. This is where it actually happens, and it was a pretty incredible race, to be honest. I didn't race that well. I didn't drive that well in certain parts of this race. I was making very small, silly mistakes in certain corners, as you'll see throughout the course of the race. Just hitting a barrier, hitting a pole, not getting a corner right, spinning out a little bit. Nothing that is, race ending or anything, but enough that it was getting me annoyed in the race, because it was a very, very close race between the top few. There was basically the top 3 that had the Emirates, as you would expect, and then me in the Entity XF, and that always seems to be the case, that there's a group of sort of 2 or 3 or 4 who are fighting over the win or the top few positions, and then there's about half of the field and out of the 8 total that are just off the pace completely and can't do anything. But yeah, I'm making a few mistakes after the first lap. I'm still there or thereabouts with these 3 Emirates, but at this point I was thinking, okay, those 3 are going to go off and fight for the win. There's no way I'm going to be able to stick with them. But they keep making mistakes as well, and the mistakes that they make, you saw the white Emirates there, just launched it into the first corner, and he was recovering throughout the rest of the race. We'll see him closer to the end. But the mistakes that they were making were bigger mistakes than I was making, and this is a perfect example of how it kind of has to be if you're in an underpowered car. You really, certainly one that's this underpowered, you really need drivers to either be way off the pace or making significant mistakes, as we're seeing here, such that it gives me any chance to be sort of even close by them. But even so, I felt like I was getting frustrated because I wasn't making the most of them making mistakes, because I was making my own mistakes as well. So coming on to the final lap, we've got the yellow Emirates in front, and at this point it kind of looks like he's got it. He's made a few mistakes on the final part of the track on the last few laps, but as long as he doesn't do that again, he's going to be fine. I'm fighting with the blue Emirates over second place, and then the white Emirates from earlier is still behind me, sort of recovering the position and trying to get back some ground. So you might see on the mini map there that the yellow Emirates that was in the lead actually made a massive mistake on the exit of the corner and was out wide. The blue Emirates is trying to slipstream me behind, but he also has the white Emirates behind him, who comes flying in behind and slipstreams into second. The blue Emirates ends up disconnecting, and I'm able to take the win 1/10 of a second ahead of the white Emirates that was doing the recovery. I'll try to show a little bit of footage and zoom into the map so you can see, but basically the white Emirates, who finished in second place, launched back on the back straight up into second place from the slipstream from the blue Emirates. The blue Emirates ends up leaving, probably to be able to just do another race. I don't know why he was fighting for the victory after the yellow Emirates had made a massive mistake coming onto the final straight. And I'm able to just hold on, and it was kind of amazing how that race finished. 1/10 of a second to get the victory in the entity ahead of these three Emirates that are just so much quicker. And going onto that final straight, coming up to the final corner in the lead, I knew I had to get that final corner right, and I just had enough after doing that to get the victory. So it was a really great race, and it's kind of a culmination of all the efforts that I'd done it throughout the course of trying to make this video. And this is why I wanted to bring this video to you, to showcase the storyline of going through it and how I ended up getting that win in the entity, the best car from 2013, getting sort of one last shout and beating the new boys as well. So unfortunately this isn't going to continue, and I'm not going to get to realize what I had in mind originally to be able to do this with every car. I realized that it's not feasible, but at least I was able to let the old boy reign supreme on the old testing track one last time. So that's pretty much it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you enjoyed down below in the comments. It is a shame because I feel like I would have enjoyed trying to get wins in the Adder and Sultan RS and Banshee 900R and these slow vehicles, as well as the quick vehicles as well. But it's just so much time between each premium race being something that you can even do that, and then having the time to be able to devote to it off streams and things like that. When that premium race is actually active, it's very difficult to do that. So yeah, let me know what you thought. Thank you guys for watching so much. It's been a little bit of a different video this one, but hopefully you've enjoyed it, and as always, I'll see you next time.